Hi, all. Thanks so much for watching Making Venture Work for Healthcare. I'm Stephanie Fields. I'm an expert in patient and family advocacy as well as philanthropy. With that, I turn to Bill Taranto, who is the president of the Merck Global Health Innovation Fund, and we are incredibly excited to talk to you about your incredible wealth surrounding venture capital, how to reach healthcare transformation through the investments that you're making. And then Sherry Duville, who is our co-producer on this series, CEO of Metagram, chair of the Trustworthy Technology and Innovation in Healthcare Consortium, as well as series editor for Taylor and Francis. And she has edited and co-authored a series of books that have defined the field of healthcare IT. And finally, Dr. Apoorv Gupta, who is my co-host and co-founder of Making Healthcare Work for You, this special series, a vice president at Premier and co-chair of the TTIC with Sherry. Thanks so much to all of you for being here.
My pleasure. Look forward to it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kick this off and ask, it was outstanding to me in the pre-interview that while venture capital, and specifically for you, corporate venture capital, is money, it's money. That's what you do. You're investing in things. Everything you came back to centered on the patient. So when you're doing these deals, you're making your decisions, you have to prioritize outcomes, patient safety, what's going to make the most impact. How do you make these decisions? How do you evaluate them from everything from ethics to safety?
So that's a great question. And so what we always start with is a use case, and we define a use case as a problem we're trying to solve, whether it's a pharmaceutical problem, whether it's an industry problem, or whether it's ultimately a patient problem that indirectly is something we can solve because we are a pharma company. And we're really an outcomes company in the end. That's what a pharmaceutical company is, and we're trying to deliver better outcomes and ultimately better patient care. And it's to us, we think about first about the patient, and then how does that then reflect back to what we do then in the pharma services space. So again, if we can find a use case that's big enough, right, where it's important enough to industry, it's important enough to my parent, which is Merck, and it's important enough then to the other users within healthcare, what's the provider, the patient, anybody that touches healthcare, we look at how that use case impacts all of them. And if we think it's a valuable enough use case, that's what we want to solve. And from that, we then go out and search the types of companies that can help us solve that. And usually the way healthcare works, at least within digital, there's no one company that solves 100% of anything. So we think of how do we put an ecosystem of companies together that really creates an integrated solution that solves that eventual problem. But again, for us, it always comes back to better patient care.
Yeah, Bill, that's really helpful. I guess maybe on that point, could you share with us some examples of specific use cases that you're particularly looking at? You had mentioned a few in terms of patient access and clinical trials, but how do you think about some of those use cases that you're currently exploring?
Yeah, I mean, again, obviously, so a little background, our fund is investing in what we call pharma services. So that's an important underlying thing to understand. And what I mean by pharma services, it sounds kind of funny, but if pharma needs a service, that's kind of where we invest. But it's across a number of areas. It's across drug discovery and clinical development. We look at supply chain and IT, and we look at patient access, and then real world evidence and data. And within all those, we try to identify those use cases. For example, if we're just looking at patient access, right? How do we get our medicines to the patient more effectively, which could be around bettering the supply chain. Could we use things like better cold storage delivery, using drones to deliver to rural areas? Around access, could we do things like care coordination, better clinical decision support tools to support the physician in servicing that patient? Social determinants of health. Can we look at why isn't a patient getting access, and then how do we help solve those access problems? Monitoring, those things all go together. If you think about the remoteness of somebody, can we use things like remote monitoring with things like telehealth, where you take all these enabling technologies to give patients better access to better care, and then hopefully for me, what I do is better medicines as they go forward in their care. But that's just one example as we think about patient access and where those typical use cases lie around patients struggling to get access to either not only just healthcare but medicines as well.
I really loved what you said about the cold chain storage, because that's one of my favorite analogies, because in terms of making AI or any digital solution work in healthcare, it's not just the technology or the code itself, it's also the people, the process, and the logistics around it. And so I really feel that, great understanding of the whole sort of end-to-end logistics, supply chain, delivery, is really critical. And then one question that came to mind when you were talking about that and talking about how you're driving towards patient outcomes is that, do you see, we're just starting to see, like in med devices, I know it's a different business than what you're in, but we're just starting to see them taking on sort of more risk for some of their devices, in terms of procedures. Do you see anything like that coming from to pharma at more like a patient level? I know there's been talk about Medicaid and Medicare, sort of outcome based analysis, but what do you think about the future of that? Is that something that you're looking at when you're looking at your landscape?
Yeah, I think from an investment perspective, probably not as much, but I think as an industry perspective, I think historically we've seen that there's there's a lot of different ways that the industry in itself can go at risk, and not only at our, as a pharma, but we've seen, the health plans go at risk. We've seen, all sorts of ways where you partner, and maybe it's even within the realm of doing more public and private partnerships, right? Because those are shared risk when you do those types, right? Where you're sharing between not only, for example, the pharmaceutical industry, but the federal government of either here or another country where, for us, example, we do those to deliver, medicines that people don't have access to at all. And we try to do it in a way where we're almost giving them away for free. We've been giving away a river blindness drug for free for a number of years, but that's also done through a private and a public partnership. And those are different ways that we certainly try to then, deliver in a way that's co-risk. But I think in the future, much like the med device, I think, healthcare is always evolving, and the way we deliver healthcare, the way we deliver any parts of healthcare are going to change. I think you'll probably see over time more shared risk amongst the patient. Maybe it's the provider, maybe it's the pharmaceutical industry. Uh, I think all pieces will start to share that risk at some point as time goes on, and we slowly start to see it. Right, as a patient, if I just talk to myself as a patient, I'm paying more now for my health insurance, even though I'm with a big corporate, than I ever did before. I'm starting to share even more risk in that respect, right? So I think over time we'll see it. There's a lot of different ways that we see it being done today. And again, a lot of it, I think it's early, is done through those public-private partnerships, but there's much more to be done. And I just think over time we're going to see a shift into much more co-risk across all players within, the health ecosystem.
You've said so many things that I have questions about, but I'll stick with relationships. This is like Jeopardy. We're sticking on this path. So, in terms of having partnerships and relationships with people, what is that role or relationship like between a CVC investor and a tech investor? Because there are so many different aspects of healthcare. They all matter, but they all have to coordinate, because if they don't, nothing is getting accomplished.
If I could use that word that you just said, we call it alignment. One of the big things that we're trying to do is, again, we start with that use case. If we can meet the other investors of the company that we're trying to invest in, as well as the C-suite of that company, and see if we're aligned on understanding what are we trying to solve for? What ultimately is your company doing? What product or service do you have? And what is the ultimate, end result that you're trying? And if we're aligned there, that makes it work. One of the things that people don't understand is we're in the most heavily regulated, complicated industries in the world. People don't even realize if you're just trying to get a prescription, 10 different entities touch it, and you still may not even get that prescription. Very complicated. There's a lot of different touch points within that. And one of the things that we see is when there's either a misunderstanding or they don't understand healthcare and how it works, that makes for misalignment, number one. There's a lot of money coming into healthcare in the last few years, but a lot of those investors just came in healthcare because they saw dollars, but they don't actually understand how complicated and how it works. So we're looking for alignment around, do you actually understand how the system works? Do you understand the company that you've invested, what it actually is going to do in the future? And then can we alignment that our investment dollars are going in to do a certain thing, to build a certain capability, to deliver a certain outcome that ultimately benefits the patient. If you get that kind of alignment, then the syndicate works really well. But the syndicate can be a lot of different types of people and relationships. It's not just, a corporate, which is where I sit, but private investor. But private investors also sit in different sort of areas. There's tech investors. There's pure tech investors. There's tech investors that are healthcare experts. You have Corporates, for example, the blues, like Echo, that Rob Toppich runs. That's another great client. You have other players that represent different parts, Mike McKesson. We do investments in all these types of individuals because what you want is a syndicate that sees all parts of those connection areas. So when we put a syndicate together, the ratio that we're looking for is across the health ecosystem, not just one type of investor. We're looking at all types of investors that touch different, the payer, the provider, the patient, all those different types of investors make the best syndicate, and that's where the best relationships come from. But it starts with alignment and coordination, or it doesn't work in the end. The investment doesn't work. It usually falls apart. The syndicate falls apart, and then we didn't do our job. We didn't deliver something that we wanted to deliver to the patient, and we failed the company ultimately if that doesn't work.
I was really taken, Bill, by that thought process, and like Stephanie had so many thoughts coming in. I had to kind of shoot something out too. So, what I'm really interested in, particularly, maybe this may be very timely, is you mentioned how you're trying to seek alignment and you're trying to figure out, where there's the process itself is so complicated that ultimately it may be still very difficult to get all the parts to align to actually get the products in the hands of the consumers. And so this makes me think about what's currently we're hearing in a very timely fashion, particularly related to United Healthcare, about how much frustration and anger there is right now in terms of consumer sentiment, and just like how people are frustrated with many different aspects of the industry, not just the insurance space. Your thoughts, Bill, just made me think about, do you take that into account at all in terms of what's going on in the global world, the political situation, consumer sentiment, and how does that inform the use cases you're identifying? I'd love to get any insights you have about how funds like Merck are really trying to help improve the social situation that we're kind of caught up in.
Yeah, again, and a lot of it is about access, right? When a patient either gets denied or doesn't get something done, or doesn't get the medicine that it's all about access. And what we try to think about is how do we improve access? And a lot of it is around efficiencies, right? We're as complicated as we're not an efficient industry. We don't have things like interoperability like the financial industry has. There's a lot of things that cause inefficiency. We're trying to think about, as it relates to use cases, how do we reduce costs? How do we create better efficiencies? And from that, we think that we can deliver better outcomes. And those are the kind of things that tie then back into that use case that then looks more holistically at the broader picture around what's happening, globally. Where are those inefficiencies occurring? Why don't patients get access? Why doesn't supply chain work? Why can't we create medicines faster? All those things are impacted by a lot of different things that happen because of the way our industry works, right? You can. It's funny, I've invested in companies that you said, this is the greatest service or product I've ever seen, and we just can't get it out to the patient, or we can't get it to the end user. Maybe it's a physician, for a lot of different reasons. And sometimes it's just the way the system works, right? Sometimes we can't even get reimbursement for some of our stuff, where you go, what do you mean we can't get reimbursement for it? Or we can't get FDA approval for something, around a DTX maybe. All these different things impact ultimately in different ways why a patient or somebody doesn't get ultimately the outcome they're looking for. And that's why there's frustrations as well within the industry, is it doesn't work the way we think it should work. And so what we're trying to do is, as we think of an investor, is part of that use case that we're trying to solve has ancillary use cases attached to it, right? It's not just a single use case, right? You might be trying to, example would be something simple as in Target ID, using A&M on Target ID, it's about patient identification, patient stratification. Okay, but the ancillary use cases are, where do you find those patients? Where are they, right? So, you can keep layering on additional use cases that expand beyond the original when you start with. You've got to be aware of that. So what we're trying to understand is, not the primary use, but all the other things once I do that investment, other things are going to happen that add additional things, that I need to solve for. And you got to try to think as holistically as you can. And we can't solve everything. I'll be frank about it. You can't solve everything, but I think you have to take a broad view when you're doing these investments. It can't be all, you might start narrow, but you've got to expand your aperture about what's happening in all parts of the industry.
I love that. And I wanted to thank you for sharing such insightful, really leading edge in the things that will really, I think, help people think through what they're working to do. Just going back to really wanting to find those partners with alignment that understand. I think a lot of it comes through humility. Like no matter how brilliant you are as an individual or even your team is, like how much can you really stay on top of and be on the leading edge and be driving, right? You have to be part of a community and part of a network, and you have to rely on other people to be able to, even if you're capable of it, you just simply don't have time. It's like when I'm in IEEE with IEEE UL 2933, I have networking people and I have medical device people that I have to rely on. I don't have time to stay into every single cutting edge detail of every part of every tech stack, right? And so you're kind of saying from a higher level, from the business of care delivery, it's kind of the same thing. You want to have a syndicate that has the community and the network to stay up to date on all the business and care delivery issues in those areas. And I think that that advice makes so much sense. One question that's been coming up a lot, especially in healthcare IT, since it's so highly regulated, is like, how do we adapt to a deregulation agenda? And so we're a non-political organization, but we do, have to follow regulations and compliance. And so I think what I love about what you said is what a lot of people misunderstand, especially in Silicon Valley, where I grew up. They misunderstand the fact that like you could get rid of the Department of Education, but it's actually really hard to dismantle the Department of Health and Human Services. And that's not, I'm not going to say it's not possible, but it's probably not really likely. And so just, you have a very sophisticated, informed perspective in terms of the deregulation agenda. Would you say that you're not expecting the complexity and regulation to disappear overnight for healthcare?
No, not at all. I don't think I think it's ridiculous to sit there, that someone's going to completely take away the FDA. I don't think that works. We still need oversight, right? But I think what I would like to see over time, though, is certainly as it relates to digital, is some loosening of how some of these things get approved. If you look at DTX, most of that stuff doesn't need the heavy, clinical trial work that the therapeutic needs. They maybe don't need the critical FDA pathway that a device or even a therapeutic needs. And loosening a little bit of some of the regular around how things get approved, how things get reimbursed, I think would be helpful. Especially when they look at DTX. I think some of the regulatory issues, even that face pharma, for example, we can't give. We invested in a company years ago called WellDoc, which is just a simple. It was the first almost the first DTX FDA approved app for diabetes and regulation of diabetes, and it, had the way you could measure your A1C and how you do your cholesterol and everything, or your diet. And we wanted to have our sales force give it away for free. Now, everybody would sit here and say, the logical thing is if you're taking, a type 2 or type 1 medicine and you have an app that helps you control that, that makes sense. There's nothing bad about that, right? It makes perfect sense that that should happen. We can't give it away for free because Sunshine Act laws and fair market value, right? And so something as simple as that, that's best for the patient, which really has no impact on us from the standpoint of we're just giving it away because it makes sense for the patient. We can't do things like that. So just loosening some of the way we think about how these digital tools help patients and making them, again, about access, allowing patients to have more access to some of these tools that they don't get access to because of some of the regulatory issues that face even our industry. So I would like to see just some deregulation, and loosening of some of the rules, but there's no way you can get rid of everything. It doesn't make any sense to do that.
Are there?
I don't think. I mean, you I'll give you an example. We were talking earlier about AI and ML, right?
Yeah.
The interesting thing if you look at AI and drug discovery, that's a pretty simple place to use it. But what happens when you start using AI around patient care? And what if that AI finds something out about the patient that we weren't supposed to find out just yet, right? Mm-hmm. Then what's the obligation of telling that patient? And who found out? Mm-hmm. What if it was the pharma industry? What if it was the payer or the price? Like, who found out? Then what's our obligation? So I think there needs to be some, regulatory controls that relates to the patient of how we think about AI and the use of AI in that sector as time goes on. So you do need some oversight, right? We can't be just running wild either. So it's just, I think just some loosening of the rules is good though.
No, we that's very aligned with what we're thinking. So what we're doing is preparing our network to basically just regulate themselves, because I think we are going to have a lot of noise and honestly confusion in the environment as to how deregulated it actually will be, specifically in healthcare. And so we're just encouraging people to manage their own risk and manage, their own liability. When I say people, I mean generally health systems.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm thinking about, Bill, if this is appropriate, again, you don't have to maybe name any names, but I would love to know if there's any one or two companies that come to mind that you've invested in that you're really proud of the sustainable impact that they're making based on the theories, philosophies, the principles that you kind of just laid out. Or potentially maybe the obverse, there are companies that come to mind which have really struggled. So if that's a fair question, I'd love to, get a little bit more of your take on that.
Yeah, there's one company that, because it was an odd company for us to invest in, but I'll go back in time. It's a company called Preventus Solutions, and it's a cardiovascular monitoring company that started as monitoring AFib and could actually predict if a patient was going to have an AFib event. And we were in cardiovascular when I started the fund in 2010. We're not in cardiovascular today, but at the time, we saw that the use case was, how do you prevent stroke and AFib events if you could better monitor? You have to understand monitoring in 2010 isn't monitoring, like it was in its infancy. It's almost where AI and ML is today, right? But monitoring today, you monitor everything. The devices are small, they're faster, they're better. But think back in 2011, 2012, monitoring was, and the biggest industry that was probably being affected was sort of the cardiovascular industry. But anyway, we started this company called Preventive Solutions. It took us 10 years to build it. One of the longest investments we've been in. And we started it from scratch. It's something we don't even really do because I don't do startup or CCAP, but we pulled it out of Mayo, the technology, and we created a company. And we used our private equity company to build, basically buy 5 different companies to put it all together into an integrated solution about, around this AFib monitoring, where we had a care coordination piece. We had, call centers, we had the whole thing. And we ended up selling it to Boston Scientific in 2021 for about $1.5 billion. And it's one of the biggest cardiovascular monitoring companies today. It's owned by Boston, but it's really helping patients unbelievably well. The technology is unbelievable. It was the first Band-Aid device basically that you put on your chest. It was the first 4 Band-Aid where you didn't have to do the Holter monitor. So, the technology was really fantastic, but they bought it and really blew it out. But what I'm proud of it is we built it from scratch and we really solved a use case that was really important to solve. And, it was a shame that Merck wasn't in cardio at the end because they may would have bought it, but we weren't. But it's in good hands now. But it's now one of the largest cardiovascular monitoring companies in the world that's just doing unbelievably well for patients and patient outcome. And I'm just proud of it because it really has nothing to do with Merck today, but we built it. And we built it almost from scratch, and you can see how you can impact patients. And now when I look at that company and how big it is today, when we sold it, I think we were about 200-300 million in revenue. I don't even know what it is today, but it's certainly double that or even more. And it's really in the end, it's doing what we set out to do: help patients. I think that just a neat one that because it's a little out of the periphery of Merck per se today. It's something I'm really proud of that we built that really has had impact. So that's a good one.
It's like you found a baby bird in the wild. You saw a need, you fostered it, you cared for it, and then it flew away. And now it comes back every once in a while and shows, with some pretty songs for you. Well, thank you so much. This was fantastic. You gave us so many incredible insights on the human aspect of venture. It's not just about the money. It's the strategy behind it, where you're putting it, how you can transform it, the cost reduction with things like you were telling us in the pre-interview about how to expedite the drug processing and getting things into the hands of patients. So it's incredible, and it's something that many, many investors should be watching and learning from you because you had incredible insights. So thank you for being on our show and for being one of our, as our tagline says, bringing together the stars of venture, medicine, and AI. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.